Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Toshio Okada seminar. Today we're diving into an intriguing connection between Hayao Miyazaki's My Neighbor Totoro and Steven Spielberg's E.T. Interestingly, this connection is actually cited in Ghibli's own released documents. So, we'll be piecing together evidence from interviews with people involved at the time and various detailed documents to explore and verify this relationship. I must admit, today's topic is a bit more challenging compared to our usual Ghibli discussions. There's a kind of thrill in this, isn't it? It's less about the straightforward joy of discovering, wow, this anime, this scene, it means this. And more about a kind of, so Hayao Miyazaki, despite his unique position, is influenced by popular hits just like anyone else. It's quite endearing to realize that Miyazaki, just a regular guy in many ways, would claim he doesn't pay attention to what's trendy, yet in reality, he's quite in tune with popular culture. I hope this gives you a bit of insight into the man behind some of your favorite films. We're revisiting Seminar 348, originally broadcasted on August 16, 2010. No new upload information today, so without further ado, let's jump into the free video. So today, let's dive into the world of My Neighbor Totoro. I was thinking about discussing the connection between Totoro and E.T. On August 16th, Japan celebrated its 17th broadcast of this cherished film on television. The first TV airing of My Neighbor Totoro was in 1989, during a program called Friday Roadshow, making it a tradition that's been ongoing for 32 years. With 17 broadcasts over these years, it averages out to more than once every 2 years. It's been in heavy rotation, truly a national treasure of an anime. Could you turn off the fan, please? But calling it a national anime doesn't quite do it justice, as its appeal stretches far beyond just Japan. It's loved worldwide. For instance, in Toy Story 3, Totoro makes a cameo appearance right there in the final scenes. And then there's The Simpsons, which crafted an episode that pays homage to the enchanting world of Ghibli films, featuring a parody scene with something akin to the cat bus. It's fascinating how My Neighbor Totoro have not only received acclaim from creators around the globe, but have also made a significant impact. Even though I thought we had exhausted all there was to discuss about My Neighbor Totoro in this seminar, having thoroughly analyzed it before, it turns out there's still an endless trove of stories to explore. I've actually stumbled upon a really curious episode related to My Neighbor Totoro. There's this book titled The Art of Totoro, which is essentially an art collection dedicated to My Neighbor Totoro. Interestingly, towards the end of the book, there's a page filled with text. It recounts how a journalist from Animage, a Tokuma Shoten anime magazine, named Masami Nomura spent half a year immersed in Studio Ghibli, closely following Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata. Since Takahata didn't pay much attention to him, Nomura ended up focusing more on Miyazaki. During this time, their conversations often revolved around Spielberg and Daiei period dramas. It might seem peculiar that Miyazaki was so engrossed in discussing Daiei period dramas and Steven Spielberg, of all things. The reason? It's all about the natural depictions and camera placements in My Neighbor Totoro. The film is notable for its subtle camera positions, reminiscent of Yasujiro Ozu and traditional Japanese period dramas, which were mostly shot in studios with limited location filming. The significance of camera positioning in these settings cannot be overstated. It's crucial for conveying the sense of season and atmosphere through the angles of camera and lighting. This insight provides a unique perspective on how Miyazaki's experiences and interests have woven into the fabric of his work, revealing the layers of depth and thought behind the creation of such a beloved film. At that time, Hayao Miyazaki was deeply contemplating how the great old Japanese movies were intrinsically linked to Japan's unique landscape and climate, Interestingly enough, around the time Finding Nemo was released, Miyazaki was frequently visiting the United States, spending quite a bit of time exploring the forests in Los Angeles. He was frankly astonished by how monotonous he found the landscape. Like, if you were to step into a forest in Japan, the moment your foot touches the ground, you're surrounded by an incredible variety of weeds, and with every step the flora changes dramatically, and you're likely to encounter bugs you've never seen before at every turn. But in Los Angeles, despite the presence of these massive sequoias and forests, the inside of these forests forests was much drier than expected, and surprisingly simple in terms of plant variety, essentially made up of a uniform layer of vegetation. So when it comes to Japanese cinema, there's this ongoing conversation about how filmmakers have been striving to depict this complex natural world, right from the black and white era, using just camera angles and lighting. And this is something you can understand in the context of My Neighbor Totoro, for instance. But then it brings up the question, why bring up Spielberg, right? What does Spielberg have to do with all this? It was quite the curveball to hear Spielberg's name in this context. However, curiosity piqued. I looked into whether Miyazaki had mentioned Spielberg during this period, or if there were any connections not immediately apparent. Also, this is a heavy and huge book, but there is a book called Studio Ghibli Works Related Documents on page 67 of this book. Let's dive into something fascinating I stumbled upon, which I believe was penned down by the legendary Toshio Suzuki himself. We're talking about the promotional strategies for two iconic films, Grave of the Fireflies and My Neighbor Totoro. Now, in these plans, there's this intriguing mention of similar works. And get this, for Grave of the Fireflies, they've listed René Clément's Forbidden Games. Now, on the surface, that makes total sense, right? Both movies, after heartbreakingly beautiful, delve into the harrowing experiences of children amidst the horrors of war. It's pretty clear why they draw that parallel. But here's where it gets really interesting. When it comes to My Neighbor Totoro, they've compared it to Steven Spielberg's E.T. Now that got me thinking, why on earth would that be? It's a bit of a head-scratcher, isn't it? But here's the kicker. These notes about similar works, they were never meant to see the light of day outside of those internal meetings. The way they've crafted the promotional strategies is quite ingenious, really. For instance, you won't find any official taglines for Grave of the Fireflies explicitly stating it's akin to Forbidden Games by René Clément. Instead, what they've done is subtly convey that sentiment without directly saying it. This method of promotion, keeping the comparisons under wraps, while ensuring the marketing team is in on the secret, is absolutely brilliant. It's like, hey, this is kind of our little nod to Forbidden Games, or yeah, this has a bit of that E.T. vibe, doesn't it? All without the public being any wiser. This insider approach to marketing is just another layer of how these films connect with us on a deeper level. So I was thinking, why are E.T. and similar works considered alike? Where do the similarities lie? After pondering this, I realized something fascinating. E.T. was released in 1982, and My Neighbor Totoro came out in 1988. So chronologically speaking, it's plausible to say that E.T. could have influenced Totoro to some extent. However, the connection wasn't clear to me until I saw this picture in The Art of Totoro. It represents the very first idea for My Neighbor Totoro. It's like a concept board drawn by Miyazaki himself. The setting is a modern town where there's this one house with an incredibly huge kampo tree growing in its yard. An elderly lady lives there alone, and during the summer vacation, her grandchild comes to visit. As they chat, the grandchild curiously asks, "Why do we have such a gigantic tree in our house?" And as the grandmother begins to tell the story, the surroundings start to change dramatically. As the story unfolds, the surrounding buildings gradually disappear, the roads turn into waterways, and instead of buildings, we now see fields. Eventually, the setting transforms into a town from the 1950s. Right around the corner, there's the grandmother's house with the massive tree, and all around it's just rice fields with complex irrigation channels running through and a river nearby. It becomes a countryside town. So imagine this, all right? There's this quaint scene where an auto rickshaw is puttering along, and that's where our story kicks off. It begins with an old lady who, out of the blue, transforms into a little girl, and then amidst a rainy backdrop in this town, she does something quite extraordinary. She offers her umbrella to a ghost. With the rain pouring down, there she was, standing next to a ghost. And in a gesture of pure kindness, she lends her umbrella to this specter. In return for her generosity, the ghost gifts her a seed. Now, she goes ahead and plants this seed in her garden, and what do you know? It grows into something incredibly massive. Fast forward to the climax of our tale, the young girl who once embarked on this magical journey has now aged into a grandmother. She's recounting the story to her grandchildren, who are about the age she was when the adventure first unfolded. Curiously, they ask, "So, is the ghost still around?" The grandmother responds, "No, I haven't seen it anymore, but who knows, it might still be there." And just as she says this, a hoo-hoo sound echoes. That hoo-hoo is none other than the ghost, Totoro, still playing his ocarina atop the kampo tree. But to the grandmother, who has grown old, the enchanting melody of what she once knew as the ghost's ocarina now merely sounds like the hooting of an owl. It's a fascinating story, isn't it? A narrative that weaves the mysterious with the mundane, transforming the ordinary into something utterly magical. So, the plan was to frame the story in the context of the 1950s Showa era, beginning in the present day, then diving back into the past before returning to the modern era, kind of weaving a tale across time, you know? Hayao Miyazaki, when he later spoke about Totoro, mentioned something I've touched on before, that all characters in his films age along with him in his heart. So Satsuki and Mei, they're still alive, aging, maybe even having kids of their own, possibly grandchildren by now. This idea, it kind of clicked for me when I heard about this tree growing tremendously, becoming a part of a fantastical story. It made me think, right, about E.T. What's the core story of E.T.? We often forget, but E.T. is essentially a botanist, an extraterrestrial with the power to make plants grow. That glowing finger, while used in the film to heal, originally had the purpose of reviving and accelerating the growth of plants, even bringing a wilted flower back to life. This symbol of revival, Eliot's withered potted flower bursting into bloom, it's like the inspiration for Princess Mononoke's forest spirit. E.T. conveyed the message that life persists as recently wilted flowers bloom again. It's all about the resurrection of E.T. as a symbol, right? Picture this scene where Elliot's got this withered flower pot, and then out of nowhere, boom, the flowers burst into full bloom. It's like a moment straight out of a magic show. Now, here's where it gets really interesting for all you anime fans out there. The inspiration behind the forest spirit in Princess Mononoke, believe it or not, traces back to E.T. Think about it. Elliot lives in a single-parent family without a father, with a responsible young Elliot and his whimsical sister craving for attention from a brother too caught up in his own world. And, you know, the flying bicycle scene feels somewhat reminiscent of the cat bus in Totoro. Both start with solitary encounters, evolving into a shared experience, soaring through the sky with everyone on board. In Totoro's sequel, Mei and the Kitten Bus, there's a scene where the cat buses fly together in the night sky, echoing this sentiment of shared wonder. If we deconstruct E.T. thoroughly and reassemble it, you get Totoro. It leads to the thought, what if Elliot, just like Satsuki and Mei, aged throughout the years? Imagine Elliot as an adult, then an old man surrounded by his grandchildren, curious about the gigantic tree in the backyard. Elliot would share the story of the mysterious alien he once helped, an alien with the power to grow plants, which eventually led to the tree surpassing 80 years in growth. The potted plant he planted in the garden turned into a massive tree, marking the landing spot for the spaceship. That forest became a vast primeval woodland. Considering this reimagined E.T. scenario, we can envisage a tale where an elderly Elliot reminisces about the past. Imagine this, during the planning stages of My Neighbor Totoro, Hayao Miyazaki just couldn't stop talking about Spielberg's works. It's as if, after watching E.T., it wasn't just the movie that fascinated him, but the possibilities it presented. Miyazaki didn't find E.T. itself as the pinnacle of its concept, but rather he was intrigued by what could be described as its sequel, or, to put it another way, an E.T. seen from a different angle. It's like in From Up on Poppy Hill, where there's a moment suggesting the sea suddenly rises, urging you to fold your futons in anticipation, a peculiar yet fascinating idea. Miyazaki thought Spielberg was brilliant, sure, but he also believed there was a different, perhaps a more compelling way to tell such a story. This sparked an unstoppable desire in him to bring his own ideas to life, ideas that drastically differed from Spielberg's approach. He became utterly obsessed with this childlike wonder and imagination, which, upon returning to Japan, led to the creation of My Neighbor Totoro. But hold on, it wasn't as straightforward as it seems. Miyazaki felt something was missing. To him, E.T. was merely the spark, not the full blueprint for Totoro. Spielberg alone wasn't enough to bring Totoro to life. It required something more, something extraordinary. Indeed, another legendary creator was needed to complete the vision of My Neighbor Totoro. So this story isn't just about how Totoro was made, but also about the incredible journey of creative inspiration. And guess what? We'll take a little break here because, as it turns out, Steven Spielberg's E.T. was just the starting point, the initial inspiration for Totoro. Yet another creator's involvement was crucial to its birth. That's a tale for another time.